I'm your host, Christene Marie. Tonight, we are talking about probably one of the hardest things that I can try to put into words, which is effectively balancing these. My Instagram goes live as sound, and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know if you ever hear that, but I couldn't, so I just got thrown off. Um, Tonight, we're going to be talking about a dichotomy of sorts, two seemingly opposing aspects of, I'll just say, two different sides of the coin, because it's not like they're opposite truths. Both very much so stand alone, and both very much so have their place. And one of the things that was probably most profound for me in my journey in just maturing in life, not even just in my journey since knowing, but really in my journey in life, has been understanding the conjunction and that two seemingly opposing truths can actually coexist. And I'm not talking about moral truths. I'm not talking about kind of the very core ethics and structure and architecture of what holds the world together. I'm talking about um, two opposing viewpoints or two different experiences, and how they really can coexist together. And that has been so incredibly important for me in my life, in my own maturing process. And even I had a friend of mine, brilliant colleague and business owner, Dmitry Smirnov. He came on the Knowing podcast last year, and he said that someone else was on his show, and he said that the mark of maturity is the ability to handle two seemingly opposing truths. And that has been so incredibly true in my life. And for me, what really catalyzed this first encounter with engaging with duality was when my husband left. My therapist told me, he was like, your husband could love you and leave you. And I was like, mind blown. Like, I could not, my immature, not fully developed brain just could not hold those two just so conflicting elements. That how could those coexist? That doesn't make any sense. If he loved me, he would stay. You know what I mean? I had no context for two very opposing aspects to both be true. And yet, as I've allowed for gray, as I've allowed for nuance, so much, surprisingly, color has come about. Rather than living in a black or white world, it's full of color and full of gray. And so you could look at it as gray and confusing and diluted and throwing up your hands and kind of going in the nihilistic direction, or you could view it as, all right, there's a lot of color here. There's a lot of aspects pulling from both seemingly opposing truths, and be curious, like, what do I have to learn from this? And there's an expansion of sorts if we allow ourselves to be curious, if we allow ourselves to take something that really is actually like mentally challenging to grasp and just sit with the discomfort of it. And discomfort itself is a hallmark that we're actually in the process of growing. It's like, okay, the struggle that a seedling goes through, being in the ground, having the water and the soil and the sunlight and all the tender to the seedling. All of a sudden it struggles and struggles, and then finally it pops through the ground, and then you see just this tiny little sprout. But it took a lot of time to get there. And in that process, in that cultivation of the seedling to a sprout, much less a sprout to a full-blown plant or tree, there's so much cultivation, there's so much processing, there's so much growth, there's so much discomfort that takes place. And so if we're willing and brave enough to engage in the discomfort of kind of like grappling and engaging with these really difficult concepts rather than hiding from them, man, there's so much that can come on the other side of it. And even today I was on a podcast. We've just had this conversation around AI and how so many folks are running away from it or turning their back on it or ignoring it because there's so much fear. And so if we're afraid of something, we will typically tend to run away from it rather than leaning into, I was just saying the word discomfort, like truly sitting with the discomfort, even of fear itself. I don't like how I feel right now around the subject of AI or around the subject of the uncertainty of my job, whatever it may be. But if we can develop the tool and muscle, it's like the working out, it's like developing and cultivating the muscle to sit in discomfort. I mean, there's so much on the other side of that that can really come forth and really allow for us to effectively have that breakthrough moment, like the seedling breaking through the ground, and then all of a sudden you see the sprout, and it's so exciting. But it can take a lot of time to have the gestation period as the cultivation of that seed takes shape into a sprout. And so tonight we're talking about these two seemingly different truths, which is authenticity and perception, and then also empathy and truth. And the reason why I'm talking about kind of at the core empathy versus authenticity, but then kind of the juxtaposing aspects of, okay, well, if I'm going to be authentic, in some ways I should kind of not even worry about how people perceive of me, what they think of me. And then if we're existing in empathy, in my experience, I would tend to over empathize, and I say that in air quotes. I would over empathize and actually leave the truth of my experience behind, and I would just be fully present with that person and their experience. And so I want to talk about the duality of both of these, because today on the podcast just really kind of got me thinking. The gentleman asked me, how do we create content? How do we show up in a way that is truly authentic? And there's so much to that question. I was like, oh my gosh, man, there's so many different ways to go. And so I wanted to dive a little bit deeper tonight on what is authenticity, and how do we handle this dichotomy of being truly ourselves while also existing aware and conscious of others. Because what I see today, this whole craze over self-love, is not what I would define as authenticity. I've actually found that more people in pursuit of self-love can actually alienate themselves from the very thing that they wanted in the first place, which was connection. But they were so in the desperate pursuit of this craze or this fad that's still external. It's still something other people are holding up as a beacon of success or a beacon of desire. They're still chasing something outside of them rather than actually going inward and truly becoming acquainted with themselves. And then they could truly learn, okay, this is who I am. Now I have to come face to face with, will I choose to accept and love and honor that person? And so self-love has actually become, I've just seen it do some real damage over the last year and a half as I've been watching trends and reading up on kind of what's the outcome of that. It's more isolation than ever before. They excuse boundaries with self abdication of responsibility. And so there's this element of, okay, this hard question of, how do I honor and come to know myself and truly be authentic, yet not lose people and forget people in the process? Because after all, what's the purpose at the end of the day? Why are we even here? And that begs a very existential question. And I could see 100% you and I having very different reasons for why we're here today. For me, some of the very core reasons of why humankind exists is for the purpose of creation, to actually mirror the greatest creator of them all and actually create something truly genuine ourselves. Two, for the purpose of connection, like truly connecting with other beings. There's this biblical narrative around the concept of God created the first person ever to exist. And they lived in perfect harmony with God. They had all the animals, they had all the food, all the everything. They were perfectly happy. There was nothing to disrupt their peace. Yet God looked at that person and said, it's not good for them to be alone. I'm going to create a companion, a helper for them. And in that story lies such a core element of, yes, that the original human in this narrative is that he was living and breathing and doing his work and performing and doing his job and creating, but he was doing it in isolation, and that wasn't good. In the isolation, he still had God. He still actually had a companion, like the most perfect divine of them all. But there was something about having a human to human connection that was so critical to his well-being at the very intrinsic core level that God said it is literally not good for man to be alone. And so as we're considering why know who we are, why be authentic, why are we even here in the first place? Creation and connection. And the two of those together are ultimately what allow for us to have our legacy written on a day-to-day basis. So when we think about kind of the end goal, having a legacy, having something that we're passing down and handing over, and something tangible and intangible, the practical creation that we create to hand over, whether it's a business or art or music or entertainment, whatever it is that we've created, and the intangible that is connection. Who are we with our children, with our partners, with our families? Who are we actually being in addition to what are we doing? And so, with this whole concept of, man, the duality of being and doing that allows for the fullness of the human experience, then it begs the question of, okay, so if I'm to really come to know myself, and if those two aspects are the end goal, I have to know myself for the purpose of creation, because if I'm simply mirroring everyone around me, I'm going to be producing something that's already created. I'm going to be kind of being a fan, and just similarly, I'm trying to think of the right word, being a replica, replicating what other people are doing, perhaps more enhanced, perhaps more colorful, but it's not a true original creation, because we're not actually sourcing from within. We're not actually sourcing something of its own kind. So that's where authenticity is so incredibly important, is that the more we come to know ourselves, the more we actually have the opportunity to truly create something truly genuine, truly one of a kind, because no one else is you and me, and no one else has our brand. And this is where I just get excited, because all of us have a unique brand. All of us have a personal brand, whether we come to know it or not. And with that, the outpouring of that, so much as we know ourselves, so much as we are connected to who we were created to be in the first place, then we can have authentic, genuine creation. And with empathy coming into play, getting to really allow for us to sit in other people's shoes and position, and really come to know who they are, therein lies connection. And then we have these vibrant relationships that are beautiful and healthy and life-giving and restorative and truly redemptive. I've experienced some relationships where I'm like, wow, that is actually healing some of the past relationships that I've had that have been really painful. And so there's so much potency in being authentic for the purpose of creation and being empathetic for the purpose of connection. But there's these two other aspects that are so incredibly important that we actually bring into the picture, right? So authenticity leads to creation, empathy leads to connection. But there's this other, when we think about empathy and authenticity existing together, there's these two other factors that I kind of want to talk about, because for so long, as we look at authenticity and empathy in isolation, we can really get to kind of a dangerous place. So if I'm solely focused on being authentic, solely focused on creation, we tap, or rather air into that place of perhaps even what some might even call narcissism, where it's, I'm so self-focused, I'm so internally, or even focused on this little creation hub that I have that's in front of me right here, right now. What am I producing? What am I creating? That we leave off the periphery of everyone around us. And that's so dangerous. And the element there where there's kind of like a guardrail, that I like to think of our values as guardrails. They really can keep us safe on our trajectory as we're pursuing our targets. Think of it as bowling pins in an alley. Our goals, our ideal, are our target, are the bowling pins, and our values keep us on the straight and narrow on our way to hit our ideals. And so as we're on our way, it's so important that we actually consider, in me being authentic. So I'm like in the authenticity lane right now. We'll talk about empathy here in a moment. The outpouring of authenticity is creation. But if I'm not being so intentional and mindful about how that is being perceived, that is where it is so incredibly important that we're not just in our own little bubble, that we actually have the ability to, yes, be the ones in the bowling alley, rolling the ball, shooting for our goals, being so laser focused. And we also have the ability to take the seat of the audience, to sit in their shoes, to observe us. How are we coming across? What is the perception of everyone around us? What do they think? What do they feel? How is my message resonating? Because there's an element here where if we're so solely focused on ourselves, solely focused on our goal, even solely focused on creation itself, we can really, there's a danger there, because in understanding, in the sitting in someone else's position and seeing ourselves and understanding our perception, man, there's so much opportunity to massage and grow and strengthen what we otherwise would just kind of be spitting out and putting out into the earth, into the ether. Um, there's an element here where perception is not people pleasing, and there's a very fine line there. And I actually grew up very much so with the posture of people pleasing. That was kind of my MO, was let me create, let me do everything for the purpose of appeasing others and gaining approval, because that's where my worth was. My worth was placed in their claps and applause. And so in becoming, really focusing on being authentic and like, okay, well, let me remove myself from them, focus on who I am, disassociate. It's effectively a disassociation from everyone around us. But it doesn't mean that we don't also learn how to sit in their shoes and still observe us. But it's okay, let me do an audit. Let me do a perception analysis, rather than my worth is intrinsically tied to who and what you say about me. That's a very, very fine line and a very big difference. It makes all the difference in the world if it's like, okay, I'm on the straight and narrow. I'm doing what I feel called to do. This is who I am. This is where I'm going. And let me just do a quick audit. How am I being perceived? And there's just this example that I thought of this afternoon for my own self. I saw two pictures that my sister snapped of me while I was in a car, literally probably within a span of 5 seconds. One of them, I actually have a kind of a tense face. I'm listening to my sister, and then I start laughing because my sister said something funny while my other sister is snapping these pictures. Y'all, it's interesting, because if I was to post the tense face picture, you would get a very peculiar snapshot of Christene Marie. And then if I was to post the laughing one, you'd get another perception. So this is where it's really important that we actually do the audit and do the analysis of what is my perception. Because if we are to truly desire growth, and if connection is, and this is now moving into the other lane of empathy, and then the goal is connection. If we really see the value in connection, if we truly were created and designed for connection, then we very well could be missing something in isolation. So, as we pursue authenticity, as we pursue this, with creation being the output, and creation being our end goal, may we not forget to analyze and consider, how are we being perceived right now? Because if I am putting something out there where I truly am being authentic and I have no thought otherwise, and it's being perceived a certain way, the beauty in knowing the perception is, now I have the ability to continue onward as I am, or tweak it ever so slightly, or bring clarity, or help with the analysis or understanding of it. We will never be able to truly change someone else's perception of us. At the end of the day, there's an element where they're going to see us as they see themselves, and we can't do much about that. But we can do our part, and I really believe that doing our part to sit in their shoes, to understand their perception, is part of radical responsibility. It's our radical responsibility to proceed from a place of authenticity, and to also understand the perception of it. And then moving into the lane of empathy, with connection being the output, the kind of, one of the values and one of the guardrails here is truth. Again, my modus operandi was to sit so much in the position of other people's experience. How do you feel? How are you doing? Are you okay? What can I do for you? That I really actually abandoned truth. And I really abandoned this semblance of being brave and courageous to share what I believed or share what I thought, because I was so focused on making people feel comfortable and making people feel loved. And so there was an element of that was very kind, or loving, or nice, I guess you could say, but it was rooted in fear. And so if we want to get to that next level of truly caring for others, true empathy, it needs to be rooted in love, not fear. And so when we remove fear, truth is like a natural overflow of empathy because it's like, man, I see the pain you're going through, and actually, here's what's cool. Oh, I just thought of this. This is so fun. Empathy turns into compassion when it's rooted in love. Because otherwise, if we're rooted in fear, we're not going to say the truth. We're not going to take the action because we're afraid of how they might feel, what others might say. But compassion is ultimately empathy plus action. It's I care so much, I feel your pain so much that I have to do something about it. And that's really where, man, truth is the fueling source in compassion. But if we're having empathy rooted in fear, we're not going to be able to take the right action. But empathy powered by love allows for action to take place because truth is right there, front and center. So the ultimate overflow of empathy plus truth is connection in the most meaningful sense. I think that as I kind of look back on as I look back on my marriage, my therapist said this to me as everything was dying. He said, he said something along the lines, I don't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of, it takes two people to have a relationship. And so if you're solely focused on their experience, sitting in their shoes, trying to make them feel good, trying to make them happy, well, there's no one for them to be in relationship with because there's no truth there. There's no substance. There's no authentic, grounded self for them to then be in relationship with. It's like it's just solely one-sided and you're on their side. There's nobody waiting there to be in relationship with. And so that's where this kind of quadrant of there's there's the authentic expression, the authentic self, with creation as the output, with perception as an anchor, as a boundary to keep us grounded, to keep us aware, head up, looking around, being alert and listening, not solely focused on our own experience, becoming mini narcissists. And then the other side, empathy, with connection being the output, but truth as the guardrail, truth as the boundary to ensure that we never lose ourselves in the pursuit of connection. So, with that, I wanted to thank you all so much for joining me tonight on the Knowing Show, and I will see you tomorrow. Joe, I just saw your chat on Instagram. I'm so glad you have the same earrings. Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so grateful for you joining, and I will see